Welcome to Love and Life, a space created for quiet reflection, soft thoughts, and honest feelings. If you're here, it's probably not because you're looking for answers, but because you're tired of pretending you have them. This podcast is for the ones who feel deeply, love quietly, and carry questions they've never dared to ask out loud. So wherever you are, lying on your bed, walking through the city, or just needing something gentle in your ears, thank you for joining me. This moment belongs to you. Today's story is about something tender, something almost every one of us has felt at some point, but not always had words for. It's about the moment we stop seeing our parents as just mom and dad and start seeing them as people. Chapter 1. Childhood isn't blind. It's simple. When you're young, your parents are the world. They're the ones who know how to tie shoelaces, fix broken toys, and drive you home after school. They seem like they have all the answers, or at least they act like they do, and that's enough to make you believe them. As a child, you don't ask where their sadness goes at night. You don't wonder what they gave up to make sure dinner was always on the table. You don't think about the days they had to hold themselves together for you. You just assume this is what grown-ups do. And one day, you'll be like them too. But then you grow. Slowly, without noticing, you start to hear the weariness in their voice. You see their hands tremble when reaching for the car keys. You witness the small moments of doubt, the pause before they answer, the long exhale after a silent meal. And one day, it hits you. They didn't always know what they were doing. They were learning, just like you. That realization is both beautiful and terrifying, because it means your childhood wasn't protected by perfection. It was protected by love that tried anyway. Love that stayed up late figuring out bills. Love that worked overtime without saying a word. Love that chose not to burden you with truths you weren't ready to carry. We often think of growing up as becoming independent, but maybe the real marker of maturity is this: seeing the people who raised you as human, not flawless, not all-knowing, just human, with fears, regrets, dreams they never chased, and emotions they didn't always know how to show. There's a quote I once read by Elizabeth Stone. She said, "Making the decision to have a child, it is momentous. It is to decide forever, to have your heart go walking around outside your body." And that's what our parents did. They gave us a piece of their hearts and let us carry it into a world that would sometimes be cruel, sometimes indifferent, sometimes wonderful. But we didn't see that. Not when we were 5. Not when we were 15. Back then, we only noticed the things they got wrong, the things they didn't say, the moments they didn't show up the way we wanted them to. It's only later, much later, when life starts to wear us down too, that we begin to understand that strength isn't always loud, that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to, that sometimes being there is the bravest thing a person can do. So this chapter isn't about blame. It's about learning to look back with softer eyes, to forgive the things we didn't understand, to appreciate the things they never explained, because they were too busy surviving. Growing up doesn't mean we owe our parents perfection. It just means we can finally hold their flaws and their love in the same hand, without needing to choose which one matters more. Because both are true. They tried, and they failed, and they stayed. And that maybe is the most human kind of love there is. Chapter 2. The distance between generations. There is a quiet kind of space that grows between people who love each other. It isn't loud. It doesn't come from anger. It's not the aftermath of an argument or the weight of silence after harsh words. It's something softer and in many ways more painful. A quiet fading, a slow drift. That's what happens between many of us and our parents. We don't stop caring. We just stop connecting the way we used to. At first, it's subtle. They ask about your day and you answer in fewer words. You ask how they're doing and they say fine, like they always have. You both mean well, but the conversation barely stretches beyond routine. Somewhere along the line, you started living in different worlds. They grew up in one where survival meant security, where dreams took second place to duty. You live in another, one filled with choices, distractions, questions they never had to ask. When you try to explain why you're anxious, they tell you to stop thinking so much. When they try to show love through food, you tell them you're on a diet. Neither side is wrong, but both sides feel misunderstood. It's not that they don't love you. It's just that the language of love has changed and no one translated it. They show up with gifts when what you want is a conversation. You write long messages when what they need is your voice. And slowly, the closeness becomes effort. Not because love is gone, but because familiarity no longer guarantees understanding. You want to talk to them about the things that matter to you, your fears, your doubts, your sense of feeling lost. But you worry they won't understand, or worse, that they'll dismiss it, so you hold it in. You keep it surface level, and every time you do, the distance grows. Still, beneath it all, there is love, strong, rooted, persistent. It's there in the way they ask if you've eaten, in the way you check the weather before they travel, in the way no matter how far apart you drift, you both still remember birthdays, anniversaries, and the name of the neighbor's cat. Love doesn't always speak fluently. Sometimes it mumbles. Sometimes it repeats old phrases that don't quite fit anymore, but it tries. And that effort, no matter how clumsy, is worth noticing. There's a quote by George Bernard Shaw. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. We assume they know us because they raised us. They assume we know them because we share their blood. But knowing someone isn't inherited, it's built again and again across new stages of life. And building takes effort. It takes patience. It takes a willingness to bridge a gap that neither side meant to create, but both feel. Maybe it starts with a different kind of question. Not, how was your day? But, what's been on your mind lately? Not, did you eat yet? But, is there anything you've been carrying alone? And maybe they won't answer right away. Maybe they'll shrug or laugh it off. But maybe, one day, they'll open a door they've been waiting for someone to knock on. Because underneath the distance, there's still a thread that never broke, only stretched. And it's waiting patiently to be picked up again. Chapter 3, The Words They Never Learned to Say, Rewritten. Some loves arrive dressed in poetry, others wear silence. For many of our parents, affection never lived in spoken form. It wasn't something they articulated. It was something they carried. Heavy, quiet, tucked behind everyday routines. They didn't grow up hearing confessions of love. No one told them that feelings needed language to survive. So they learned to show instead of say. They believed presence was enough. And often, it was. Still, there's a particular kind of longing that blooms in a child who craves softness. You wanted to be seen, not through discipline, not through structure, not through rules, but through warmth. A kind word, a simple sentence, a hand resting gently on your shoulder when you were afraid. But instead, you were given function. A warm meal, a fixed bike, a ride home after dark, useful things, thoughtful things, but not the kind of love you read about. Not the kind that echoes. You didn't know how to interpret their version, and they didn't know how to offer yours. So both sides stayed a little hungry, not from neglect, but from unfamiliarity. You see, they didn't choose emotional distance. They inherited it. Their parents likely offered even less. Perhaps only silence, perhaps only orders, perhaps nothing at all. So what you received might already have been their version of more. And when you view it that way, something softens. You stop demanding fluency in a language they never had the chance to learn. You start recognizing care in the places you once overlooked. The way they adjusted the fan before leaving your room. The way they remembered the name of your friend, even if they never met them. The way they called, not to say anything profound, but just to ask if you had eaten. It's easy to romanticize expressive love, and yes, it's beautiful. Necessary, even. But not every heart was taught to beat out loud. Some learned rhythm through repetition, through staying, through waiting, through returning home after every disagreement. That, too, is a kind of saying, not in words, but in continuity. And now that you've grown, now that your vocabulary stretches further than theirs ever did, you hold a choice. You can resent what was missing, or you can name what was present. The quiet endurance, the patient sacrifices, the ways they tried, even when they didn't know how. Because love doesn't always come dressed in declarations. Sometimes it just shows up, every day, without needing applause, without knowing how to say it, but showing it anyway. Chapter 4. The first time you saw them cry, rewritten. You didn't expect it, not from them. They had always been the still point in your storm, the voice that steadied yours, the hands that never shook. Even when the world spun wildly, they remained grounded, or so you thought. But that day, something shifted. You caught them in a moment they didn't mean to show. Their eyes weren't sharp, their posture wasn't firm, and the room felt smaller somehow. It wasn't the tears themselves that startled you. It was the way they tried to hide them. Like a child caught doing something forbidden. You stood there, unsure of whether to retreat or step forward. You didn't know how to comfort the one who had always been your comfort. What do you say when the strong one breaks? Until that moment, you'd never questioned their solidity. Even when they were quiet, you thought it was choice. Even when they hesitated, you assumed they were being careful. But now, it became clear. They were carrying more than they ever admitted. Their sadness had been layered beneath years of repetition. Waking early, working late, stretching budgets, swallowing opinions, smiling when exhausted. They never asked for applause. They just endured. And now, for once, they didn't. Seeing them this way didn't make them smaller in your eyes. It made them real. They weren't sculpted from resilience. They were built from moments like this. Private, uncelebrated, human. You wanted to ask what had happened, but something stopped you. Not fear, not discomfort. Something else, a knowing, as if some wounds don't ask for questions, only presence. So you stayed, quiet, still, letting them have space, not for their strength, but for their softness. You began to understand that love doesn't only exist in protection. Sometimes it lives in being willing to be seen, fully and without defenses. And maybe, without realizing it, they had taught you the most tender lesson of all, that even the people we depend on need somewhere to lean, that even those who raise others must at times be held. Chapter 5: The Guilt of Not Calling Enough, rewritten. Time doesn't always announce its passing. It slips quietly through mornings filled with deadlines, errands, and late meals eaten over glowing screens. One evening, while folding laundry, you pause. You can't remember the last time you heard their voice. Not because of any conflict, not out of anger or forgetfulness. Just life. It expanded so gradually that the days grew heavy without you noticing. In the background of your mind, their presence lingers like a soft hum. Not loud, but persistent. You think of moments when they used to call first. How they always remembered your schedule better than you did. How they once worried over little things you brushed off. Now, the silence between you is full of small hesitations. You hesitate to reach out, not because you don't care, but because too much time has passed. You wonder if it's too late to make the moment feel natural again. The truth is, they're likely waiting, not with resentment, but with hope. They don't count the days. They don't keep score. Still, they notice. You imagine them, perhaps sitting in a quiet kitchen, the chair across from them untouched. You picture their expression when a familiar ringtone doesn't arrive. Not sad, necessarily, just quieter than usual. The ache doesn't shout. It stays beneath the surface, woven into everything. A subtle weight, a reminder that love needs tending. Not grand gestures, just a little light. You remember all the times they made room for you, the times they showed up unasked, how they gave without requiring permission or recognition. And now, with your own calendar spilling into margins, you see how rare that kind of devotion is. One day, out of nowhere, the thought becomes too loud to ignore. You unlock your phone. No plan, no guilt-laced script. Just a need to close the distance, even by one breath. When they answer, the voice is familiar, steady, gentle, carrying no trace of disappointment. They don't ask why it took so long. They ask how you are. And that's all. Some silences don't need to be explained. They only need to be broken. Gently, lovingly. Like turning a light back on in a room that never stopped waiting for you to return. Chapter 6: The Quiet Things They Sacrificed. There are stories you were never told, not because they were painful, but because they weren't meant to compete with yours, because somewhere along the way, your journey became the center, and they were glad to step aside. You see, they once stood at a different beginning, with hopes of their own, visions quietly imagined in late-night solitude. Not loud dreams, not ones meant for applause, but personal ones, held close like a folded letter never sent. But when you arrived, the shape of their lives bent gently around yours. They didn't drop their dreams all at once. They simply let go of them gradually, like releasing steam through a window slightly cracked. One day at a time, one decision after another, until those personal goals no longer needed to be said aloud because something else had taken their place. You. No ceremony marked those sacrifices. No one stood beside them to say, "I see what you gave up today." And yet, they kept giving. Sometimes it was choosing silence over correction, so your confidence could grow. Other times, it was smiling through exhaustion, so your sense of safety would never falter. There were mornings they rose before dawn, not because they wanted to, but because someone had to. And as you chased your next thing, the next grade, the next job, the next version of yourself, they stayed behind, steady and unseen, holding the space you never had to worry about losing. They didn't mention what it cost them, not because it didn't matter, but because to them, your becoming was the only return they ever asked for. Now, looking back, you may notice it. The unfinished project in the drawer, the quiet sigh after your success, the way they still smile at you like you're the best thing they've ever built, because you are. Chapter 7. Seeing yourself in them. You notice it not all at once, but through fragments. A gesture made without thinking. The way your hand hesitates before switching off a light. A glance drawn from instinct rather than memory. It feels familiar, not because you practiced it, but because it lived in someone else first. And now, without permission or intention, it lives in you. There was a time when you swore you'd be nothing like them. Not out of resentment, but from the quiet belief that difference meant growth. You chased your own voice, carved new habits, imagined yourself free from inherited patterns. But then, one day, you laugh, and the sound surprises you. Not because it's unfamiliar, but because it belongs to them. A laugh you heard echo through rooms you grew up in, now rising from your own chest. It's not just the way you speak or how your brow furrows when you're lost in thought. It's deeper. It's the way you choose calm over confrontation, how you hesitate before asking for help, how you carry responsibility like a second skin. You remember times when they moved like that, when they swallowed frustration to protect your peace, when they stood in silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because they feared their words might fall too heavily. You used to read their stillness as distance. Now, you understand it as discipline, a constant, invisible work of holding things together. In this reflection, you begin to feel something more than recognition. You feel forgiveness, not the loud kind, not the dramatic, tearful resolution, but the kind that arrives quietly when you realize how many things they carried without complaint, and how many of those things you carry now without ever realizing when they were passed down. You once believed your story was separate. Now, you see it as a thread, not bound, but woven. Their rhythms moving inside your decisions, their fears softened into your caution, their hopes blooming through your courage. What used to feel like imitation now feels like a form of honor. You haven't become them. You've absorbed what was true and built something new around it. Chapter 8. When you become the protector. It happens without announcement. No ceremony, no clear moment of transition. One day, you just notice the shift. You're the one holding the door open. You're the one remembering their medication, offering your arm on uneven sidewalks, glancing back more often than they do. You used to follow their lead. Now, you instinctively walk half a step ahead. They don't resist it. They smile, grateful, maybe even relieved. But part of you still looks for the version of them that never needed help. The one who always seemed taller, stronger, endlessly capable. That version hasn't vanished. It simply grew tired. They've spent decades watching over you. And now, in subtle ways, they're learning how to be watched over. It's not easy. For them, asking for assistance feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. So much of their identity was built on self-sufficiency, on showing up no matter what. And for you, stepping in brings a tenderness you didn't expect. You tie their shoelaces, refill their tea, explain the settings on a phone screen, and realize you're repaying a debt that was never spoken aloud, only felt. You see it in their eyes, a flicker of hesitation, then trust. They're learning to lean. You're learning to hold. It's a quiet exchange, full of small rituals. You notice when they're cold before they say so. You wait for their stories, even if you've heard them many times before. You slow your pace, not because they ask, but because you know they won't. None of this feels heroic. It's not dramatic. It's gentle, consistent, often invisible, just like the care they once gave you. You don't protect them the way they protected you. Your version looks different. Less about shielding from the world, more about softening it, creating ease where there used to be effort, offering presence where once they stood alone. And maybe that's how love evolves. Not by keeping things the same, but by taking turns. They were your first shelter. Now, you are theirs. Chapter 9. The things you'll never know. They did not everything love gives leaves a record. Some of it disappears as it's being offered. Like rain soaked into soil long before the roots ever notice. There are choices they made that you'll never hear about. Moments that cost them sleep, energy, comfort, traded silently, long before you were old enough to understand what had been given up. You never knew about the night they stayed awake because your breathing sounded different. Or the time they skipped their own doctor's appointment so they wouldn't miss yours. You didn't see them turning down an invitation, not because they didn't want to go, but because they couldn't afford the gas after paying for your school trip. They never told you how many times they reheated the same cup of coffee, or how they hid their stress behind a calm voice, just so your world wouldn't shake too. They figured out how to make less feel like more, and somehow you never noticed the missing pieces, because they carried the emptiness in silence. There were holidays they went without gifts to make sure you had yours. Conversations they bit back to let you speak freely. Hurtful words they absorbed so yours wouldn't be burdened with regret later. These were not grand gestures. They were quiet edits to their lives, sacrifices stitched into the background of your everyday. They didn't document them. They didn't bring them up during disagreements. They didn't save them for some dramatic reveal. They simply let them go. Because in their eyes, love wasn't about being seen. It was about seeing you become someone they could be proud of, even if it meant fading into the blur of your forward motion. And someday, maybe while folding laundry or walking home from work, you'll feel a sudden tug in your chest, a memory without a clear origin, a warmth that arrives uninvited. That's them, still giving, still shaping your life, long after the details have been forgotten. Some love leaves no footprints, but it keeps you from falling all the same. Chapter 10. Love, after everything time, has a way of changing love, not erasing it, not dimming it, but softening its edges, making it less about needing, more about knowing. You look back and see how much was done for you, and not with the loudness of declarations or the clarity of explanations, but with small, steady choices that wrapped around your life like invisible threads. You no longer ask why they didn't say more, or why they sometimes seemed distant, because now you understand. They weren't keeping love from you. They were expressing it in the only language they knew. And now, as life folds into new shapes, you feel it from the other side. You begin to love differently too, not for recognition, not to prove something, but because it feels natural to offer what you once received. Maybe you check on them more often, or maybe you simply carry them in thought as you go about your day. You don't expect them to change. You don't expect them to say everything you wish they had. Instead, you accept what they gave and what they couldn't. You forgive both, because love, when it matures, stops measuring. It stops keeping score. It understands that people love from the capacity they have, and that sometimes that capacity was stretched farther than you ever knew. They won't always understand you. They may never say the words you longed for, but they built the road that brought you here. And that means something. Love doesn't always look the way we imagined. It's not always soft, not always warm, but often it's enduring. And that kind of love, the kind that stays even when it's hard, that's the kind worth carrying forward. So you do, in your actions, in your patience, in your willingness to show up, even when no one's watching. Because after everything, the growing up, the pulling away, the circling back, you realize something simple and profound. Love doesn't ask for anything in return. It just hopes you arrive safely, and that when you do, you remember where you came from, not with guilt, but with gratitude. Thank you for spending this quiet time with me. If today's words brought you comfort, reflection, or even just a moment of stillness, I'm grateful. Take care of yourself, and when you're ready, I'll be here in the next video.